On a sold-out flight from Atlanta to New York, every seat is a commodity. Every passenger, a piece of a puzzle about to take to the skies. For Arthur Finch, a man accustomed to the world bending to his will, his first-class ticket was more than a seat, it was a throne. But when he saw the man assigned to the seat beside him, a black soldier in uniform, his face twisted in disgust. He uttered 6 words to the flight attendant that would ignite a firestorm at 30,000 feet. "I will not sit next to him." Little did he know the captain was listening, and the karma that was about to unfold would not just cost him his flight, but his entire life's work. This is the story of how one man's prejudice led to his spectacular downfall. Arthur Finch believed the world operated on a simple, elegant principle hierarchy. There were winners and there were losers, predators and prey, and he had spent his entire 54 years ensuring he was firmly at the top of the food chain. As the CEO of Finch Global Investments, a private equity firm he had inherited and ruthlessly expanded his name, was a quiet syllable of power whispered in boardrooms across Wall Street. He wasn't just wealthy, he was insulated, cocooned in a world of bespoke suits, chauffeured cars, and the deferential smiles of those who wanted something from him. Today was the culmination of his life's work. A flight from Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International to JFK. But it wasn't the destination that mattered. It was the meeting. A $7 billion merger with Thorne Industries, a legacy defense and aerospace conglomerate, helmed by the legendary retired General Wallace Thorne. This deal would cement Arthur's place not just among the rich, but among the titans. It was his magnum opus. He moved through the airport with an air of practiced impatience, his polished leather shoes clicking a rhythm of self-importance on the concourse floor. He disdained public travel, but his private jet was undergoing unscheduled maintenance in Miami, a minor annoyance that had forced him to fly commercial. First class, of course, a necessary concession to the realities of the common man. He settled into seat 2B, the plush leather sighing under his weight. He immediately took out his tablet, the screen glowing with stock tickers and encrypted emails. He was reviewing the final pitch for General Thorne, a man known for his discipline and intolerance for weakness. Everything had to be perfect. Passengers continued to board a slow-moving river of humanity he did his best to ignore. The air filled with the scent of perfume coffee and the low hum of anxious chatter. He heard a polite, "Excuse me, sir," and looked up, ready to offer a dismissive wave. Standing in the aisle was a young man, perhaps in his late 20s. He was tall, with a ramrod-straight posture that spoke of immense discipline. He was dressed in Army combat uniform, the digital camouflage pattern crisp and clean. On his chest were the stripes of a sergeant, and above them a combat infantryman badge and the distinctive wings of a paratrooper. His face was stoic, his eyes holding a quiet weariness that seemed at odds with his youth. He was black. The soldier indicated the seat next to Arthur 2A. "That's my seat," he said, his voice calm and even. Arthur Finch felt a coil of something ugly and acrid tighten in his gut. It was an instinct, a prejudice so deeply ingrained he didn't even recognize it as a choice. He saw the uniform not as a symbol of service, but as an emblem of a lower station, a job for those who couldn't succeed in the real world, his world. And the color of the man's skin only amplified that feeling. This was his space. He was flying to the most important meeting of his life, and he would not have his concentration, his aura sullied by this proximity. He didn't respond to the soldier. Instead, He pressed the flight attendant call button, the small blue light illuminating above his head like a beacon of his indignation. A moment later, a flight attendant with a warm, professional smile arrived. Her name tag read, Clara. "Yes, sir. Can I help you?" Arthur didn't even look at the soldier who was still standing patiently in the aisle. He gestured with a flick of his wrist towards the empty seat. "There's been a mistake," Arthur said, his voice low but laced with steel. "I cannot have this gentleman sitting here." Clara's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She glanced at the soldier, then back at Arthur. "Sir, the flight is completely full. This is his assigned seat." "I understand that," Arthur said, his tone dripping with condescension. "But I am a first-class passenger paying a premium for a certain level of comfort and environment. I will not be sitting next to a soldier for a 3-hour flight." He made the word soldier sound like an insult. The soldier sergeant Marcus Thorne remained silent. He hadn't moved a muscle, his gaze fixed straight ahead. He had endured far worse than the petty bigotry of a man in an expensive suit. He had faced down threats in the dust-choked valleys of Afghanistan and the sweltering jungles of unnamed countries. The ignorant prejudice of one man was a buzzing fly in a hurricane of his life's experiences. His only thought was of getting home to see his mother in her hospital bed in upstate New York. This was just an obstacle. Clara, however, was caught in the middle. "Sir," she said, trying to keep her voice placating, "I'm sure we can—" Arthur cut her off. He finally looked at Sergeant Thorne, a cold, dismissive appraisal from head to toe. Then he turned his gaze back to Clara, and his voice dropped to a venomous whisper, ensuring only she could hear the full extent of his ugliness. "Let me be perfectly clear," he hissed. "I paid for a premium experience not to be seated next to someone like him. Find him another seat, in the back, where he belongs." The implication was unmistakable, the racism hanging thick and foul in the recycled air of the cabin. Clara's professional demeanor cracked, replaced by a flash of disbelief and anger. The quiet drama in the second row of first class was starting to draw glances from other passengers. Arthur Finch, confident in the power of his money and status, leaned back in his seat. He had made his demand. Now it was up to the staff to accommodate him. He had no doubt they would. They always did. Clara Jenkins was a veteran flight attendant with 12 years of experience. She'd seen it all: medical emergencies, panic attacks, drunken brawls, and even a proposal at 35,000 feet. She was an expert in de-escalation, her smile a practiced tool, and her calm voice a shield. But the cold, undisguised contempt in Arthur Finch's whisper had bypassed all her defenses. It wasn't a complaint about legroom or a noisy neighbor. It was a rejection of another human being's dignity. She looked at Sergeant Thorne, whose face remained a mask of disciplined neutrality. He was holding his carry-on, his knuckles white. He was a statue of patience in the aisle, a silent testament to a strength Arthur Finch could never comprehend. Her duty was to her passengers, all of them. "Sir," Clara began again, her voice now firmer, stripped of its earlier warmth. "This is Sergeant Thorne's assigned seat. There are no other seats available on this aircraft. I must ask you to allow him to sit down so we can prepare for departure." Arthur scoffed a dry, rasping sound of disbelief. "Are you listening to me? I am a Platinum Medallion member. I have flown over 2 million miles with this airline. I am not asking. I am telling you to resolve this. Move him." The confrontation was no longer private. The passenger in 3B, a woman in her 60s, was openly glaring at Arthur. Across the aisle, a young man had discreetly started recording on his phone. The tension in the first-class cabin was becoming a palpable entity, a bubble of discomfort that was expanding with every passing second. Sergeant Thorne finally spoke, his voice not aimed at Arthur, but at Clara. "Ma'am, if it makes things easier, I can stand near the galley until you find a solution. I don't want to delay the flight." His grace was a stark contrast to Arthur's arrogance, and it only seemed to infuriate Arthur more. "You see," Arthur spat, gesturing at the soldier. "Even he understands. Now go and do your job." Clara felt a surge of protective fury. This soldier, who had likely sacrificed more than Arthur Finch could ever imagine, was offering to inconvenience himself to appease this bully. It was an injustice she couldn't allow. "No, Sergeant," she said, turning to him with a reassuring look. "This is your seat. Please wait here for one moment." She turned back to Arthur, her expression now one of grim resolve. "Mr. Finch, I am going to explain this one last time. This aircraft will not be departing until every passenger is seated. Sergeant Thorne is assigned to seat 2A. If you refuse to sit next to him, the only alternative is for you to be removed from the flight." Arthur's face, which had been a mask of haughty confidence, began to mottle with rage. He was being challenged. A uniformed service worker was defying him. It was unthinkable. "Removed?" He laughed a humorless bark. "You can't be serious. Do you have any idea who I am? I will have your job for this. I will call my corporate contacts at this airline, and you will be fired before we even land. Now get your supervisor." "I am the lead flight attendant for this cabin, sir," Clara said, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "And I don't need a supervisor to enforce airline policy and basic human decency." The word decency was a lit match on gasoline. Arthur Finch finally snapped. He rose slightly from his seat, his voice rising from a whisper to a full-blown, arrogant pronouncement intended for the entire cabin to hear. "This is unacceptable. I paid thousands for this ticket, and I absolutely refuse to sit next to this black soldier." He said the words "black soldier" as if they were a contagion. The ugly prejudice once whispered was now shouted into the open. A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. The hushed whispers turned into murmurs of disgust. The man with the phone now held it up openly, his camera's red light a damning, unblinking eye. Sergeant Thorne flinched. It was barely perceptible, a slight tightening of his jaw, a flicker in his eyes. He had been called worse on the battlefield by his enemies, but to hear it here at home in the country he swore an oath to defend was a different kind of wound. It was a betrayal. Clara knew the situation was beyond her now. De-escalation had failed. The line had been crossed. This was no longer a customer service issue. It was a matter of security and principle. "That's it," she said, her voice cold as ice. She reached for the intercom phone on the bulkhead wall. "You've made your choice, Mr. Finch." She pressed the button to call the cockpit. "Captain Rostova," she said, her voice trembling slightly with controlled anger. "This is Clara in the forward cabin. We have a situation here. I need you in first class, immediately." A calm, authoritative female voice crackled back through the speaker, audible to the first few rows. "On my way, Clara." Arthur Finch sat back down, a smug, triumphant look on his face. He believed the captain, the ultimate authority, would surely understand his importance and rectify the situation. He straightened his tie, confident that this little power play by a flight attendant was about to be overruled. He had no idea that he had just sealed his own fate. The captain was coming, and with her, the beginning of his reckoning. The cockpit door hissed open, and a figure emerged that instantly commanded the attention of the entire cabin. It was not the grizzled, silver-haired man many might have expected. Captain Eva Rostova was a woman in her early 40s, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe professional bun. Her uniform was immaculate, her posture exuded an aura of absolute command, and her blue eyes were as sharp and clear as a winter sky. She had the focused, unyielding demeanor of someone who routinely guided 200 tons of metal through thunderstorms and treacherous crosswinds. She didn't hurry. She walked down the aisle with a deliberate, measured pace, her gaze sweeping over the passengers. A hush fell over the cabin as she moved. This was her aircraft, her domain. Every person on board, from the crying baby in economy to the arrogant CEO in 2B, was her responsibility, and she treated that responsibility with the gravity of life and death. Clara met her halfway, speaking in a low, urgent tone, explaining the situation, her voice tight with professionalism, but her eyes conveying her disgust. Captain Rostova listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When Clara was finished, the captain simply nodded once, a clipped, decisive gesture. She continued down the aisle and stopped, positioning herself to face both Arthur Finch and Sergeant Marcus Thorne, who still stood patiently a silent observer to the drama swirling around him. Captain Rostova first addressed the soldier. Her voice was unexpectedly soft, yet carried the same weight of authority. "Sergeant," she said, her eyes meeting his. "Captain Eva Rostova. May I see your boarding pass, please?" Sergeant Thorne handed it to her. She glanced at it, then back at him. "Seat 2A. You're in the right place. Thank you for your service. Please stand by for 1 moment." She handed the pass back to him, a small gesture of validation that spoke volumes. Then she turned her full, undivided attention to Arthur Finch. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her authority was a palpable force in the confined space. "Sir," she began, her voice calm and dangerously level, "I am Captain Rostova. I have been informed that you are refusing to take your seat and allow another passenger to take his, thereby delaying the departure of this aircraft." Arthur, seeing the captain, puffed out his chest, sensing an ally who would understand the pecking order of the world. "Captain, thank you for coming. Your flight attendant was being completely unreasonable. As I was explaining to her, there has been a seating error. I simply cannot sit here." He gestured vaguely towards Sergeant Thorne. Captain Rostova's eyes narrowed slightly. "There is no error, sir. The seating manifest is correct. The issue, as I understand it, is not with the airline, but with your personal preference. Is that correct?" "It's not a preference, it's a matter of principle," Arthur retorted, his arrogance returning full force. "I am on my way to a multi-billion-dollar business meeting. I require a certain standard. I will not have my pre-meeting preparations disturbed by being seated next to—" He trailed off, looking for a word that sounded less overtly bigoted than his last outburst. "A uniformed member of the United States Armed Forces," Captain Rostova finished for him, her voice dripping with ice. "Precisely," Arthur said, nodding, completely oblivious to the trap he had just walked into. He should be in the back with the rest of them. The captain let a beat of silence hang in the air, allowing the weight of Arthur's words to settle over the cabin. The other passengers were watching, rapt. "I see," Captain Rostova said slowly. She took a small step closer, invading his personal space. "Let me tell you what I see, Mr. Finch. I see a soldier returning from a place you couldn't imagine, wearing the uniform of a nation you and I are privileged to live in. A uniform that represents a commitment to protect our country, often at great personal cost. My father was a pilot in the Air Force. My brother currently flies Apache helicopters, That uniform is not a symbol of a lower station. It is a symbol of honor sacrifice and a dedication that your money, quite frankly, cannot buy." Her voice was still quiet, but every word was a hammer blow dismantling Arthur's worldview piece by piece. "On this aircraft," she continued, her gaze unwavering, "we are a community. The only hierarchy that matters here is the one that ensures the safety of every single person on board, and that hierarchy begins and ends with me. Your platinum status and your business meetings are irrelevant at 30,000 feet. Arthur Finch was stunned into silence. His face was a canvas of shock and fury. He was being lectured, dressed down in public by this woman. "So now you have a choice," Captain Rostova declared, her voice hardening. "I am going to give you 2 options, and you will choose one of them right now so we can get these good people on their way." She held up one finger. "Option 1. You apologize to Sergeant Thorne for your deplorable behavior. You will then sit down in your assigned seat, put on your seatbelt, and you will not utter another word to him or my crew for the remainder of this flight, unless it is please or thank you. You will fly to New York in silence." She then held up a second finger. "Option 2. You will gather your belongings and I will have you escorted off my aircraft immediately. You will be banned from this airline for life, and I will personally file a report with airport security regarding your disruptive and discriminatory behavior, which may have further legal consequences for you." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more intimidating than a shout. "The choice is yours, Mr. Finch, but I assure you this plane is not moving another inch until you make it. What will it be?" The cabin of Flight 1124 had become a silent courtroom. Captain Eva Rostova was the judge, the passengers the jury, and Arthur Finch stood in the dock of his own making. The air was thick with anticipation. Every eye was locked on him, waiting for his response to the captain's unequivocal ultimatum. For a moment, Arthur's face was a storm of conflicting emotions. The arrogant certainty that had defined him his entire life was warring with the shocking reality that his power had vanished. Here in this aluminum tube, hurtling through the sky, his net worth meant nothing. His connections were useless. He was just another passenger subject to the absolute authority of the woman in the pilot's uniform. His pride, a monstrous, bloated thing, fought against the ropes of logic. Apologize to him, to a man he considered his inferior in front of all these common people, it was anathema to his very being. The humiliation would be unbearable. But then the alternative settled in. Being thrown off the flight. The image flashed in his mind, the ignominy of being led down the jet bridge like a common criminal. The logistical nightmare of finding another flight. The almost certain guarantee of missing his meeting with General Thorne, the deal that was to be the crowning achievement of his career. $7 billion hung in the balance, a weight so immense it began to crush his pride. He looked at Captain Rostova's unyielding face. There was no negotiation in her eyes, no hint of compromise. He looked at Sergeant Thorne, who had watched the entire exchange, with a quiet, almost sorrowful dignity. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't angry. He just looked tired, like a man who had seen too much real conflict to be bothered by this petty skirmish. That more than anything enraged Arthur. The soldier's composure felt like a judgment. Gritting his teeth so hard his jaw ached. Arthur made his calculation. The deal was everything. His pride could be salvaged later. He could write letters, make calls, ruin these people from the comfort of his office. But first he had to get to New York. "Fine," he snarled the word tearing from his throat. He chose option 1. but he would do it on his own terms. He refused to look at Sergeant Thorne. Instead, he stared at the seat back in front of him, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests. "My apologies for the misunderstanding." He mumbled the words, tasting like ash in his mouth. It was a pathetic, half-hearted attempt, devoid of any sincerity. Captain Rostova was not satisfied. "I don't think he heard you, Mr. Finch. You will look Sergeant Thorne in the eye, and you will give him a genuine apology for your discriminatory remarks." Arthur's head snapped up. "This is ridiculous." "The choice is still on the table, sir," the captain said coolly. "We can call the ground crew right now." Checkmate. Defeated. Arthur slowly, painfully turned his head. His eyes, burning with a venomous hatred, met Sergeant Thorne's. The soldier's gaze was steady, calm, and unnervingly clear. It was like looking into a deep, still lake. "I apologize," Arthur forced the words out, each syllable a surrender, "for my words." Sergeant Thorne simply nodded once. He didn't say, "It's okay." He didn't say, "Apology accepted." He offered no absolution, no comforting balm for Arthur's wounded ego. He just acknowledged the words and let them hang there, stark and insufficient. "Very well," Captain Rostova said, her tone final. She turned to the soldier. "Sergeant Thorne, your seat is now available. Please be seated." Sergeant Thorne moved past her and slid into seat 2A by the window. He put his bag under the seat in front of him, clicked his seatbelt, and then stared out the window at the bustling tarmac, effectively dismissing Arthur Finch's existence. He was done with the confrontation. He was focused on home. The captain fixed her gaze on Arthur one last time. "Remember the second part of the deal, Mr. Finch. Silence." She tapped her finger on his armrest for emphasis. "Not one word." With that, she turned and walked back toward the cockpit, her mission accomplished. As she passed a few passengers, murmured, "Thank you, Captain." The woman in 3B gave her a thumbs up. A ripple of applause, quiet but definite, started in the rows behind first class and spread through the economy cabin. It was a vote, a collective endorsement of decency over prejudice. For Arthur Finch, the sound was deafening. It was the sound of his own humiliation. He sank into his seat, his face burning as if he had a fever. The plane, which he had always seen as a chariot carrying him to his triumphs, now felt like a pillory. He was trapped on display, the villain, in a play he never intended to star in. The flight attendants completed their final checks. The cabin doors were sealed, and the plane began to push back from the gate. Arthur stared blankly at his tablet, the numbers and charts of his $7 billion deal swimming before his eyes. He had won the battle. He was still on the plane. He was still going to make his meeting. But the regret was already beginning to fester. It wasn't a moral regret. He still believed he was right. It was a strategic regret. He had made a scene. He had lost control. He had exposed himself, and in his world exposure was weakness. As the engines roared to life and the plane accelerated down the runway, lifting into the sky, Arthur Finch felt a profound sense of isolation. He was surrounded by people, yet utterly alone in his silent, simmering rage. He glanced at the man beside him. The cause of all this. Sergeant Thorne was asleep, or pretending to be his head, resting against the cool glass of the window, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. He seemed to be at peace. It was a peace that Arthur Finch at that moment coveted more than any deal. The 3-hour flight to New York was the longest of Arthur Finch's life. The silence demanded by Captain Rostova was a form of torture more exquisite than any tirade. It forced him inward into the echo chamber of his own fury and humiliation. Every slight cough from a nearby passenger, every whisper felt like a directed barb. He was acutely aware of the furtive glances, the subtle headshakes of disapproval. The video, he knew, was probably already making its way through the digital ether. He tried to focus on his presentation for Thorne Industries, but the words and figures on his tablet were a meaningless jumble. The face of General Wallace Thorne, a stern, craggy image he'd studied from corporate profiles, loomed in his mind. The general was a man of discipline, a West Point graduate, a decorated veteran of 2 wars. What would a man like that think of the scene Arthur had caused? He pushed the thought away. The general was a businessman, now a pragmatist. He would care about the bottom line, about the synergistic efficiencies of the merger. The petty squabbles of a commercial flight wouldn't matter. He clung to this belief like a life raft. When the plane finally landed at JFK, Arthur couldn't unbuckle his seatbelt fast enough. He was desperate to escape the judgment-filled cabin. He didn't spare a glance for Sergeant Thorne, who was already on his feet retrieving his bag from the overhead compartment with an economy of motion. Arthur pushed his way into the aisle, nearly knocking over another passenger in his haste. "Enjoy New York," Clara, the flight attendant, said to him as he deplaned her smile professional, but her eyes holding a glint of steel. It was not a pleasantry. It was a dismissal. He rushed through the terminal, his anxiety mounting. The flight had landed on time, but the delay at the gate in Atlanta had eaten into his schedule. He was supposed to be at the Thorne Industries headquarters in Midtown in less than 90 minutes. Factoring in JFK traffic, it was going to be dangerously close. His prearranged car was waiting, but the journey into Manhattan was a crawl. Every red light, every gridlocked intersection was a new torment. He barked at the driver, a man named Tony, to find another route to drive faster. But there was nowhere to go. The city was a concrete cage. His phone, which he'd switched on the moment he was off the plane, began to buzz incessantly. A knot of dread tightened in his stomach. He saw a text from his chief operating officer, Richard. "Call me. Urgent." He ignored it. Then another from his head of PR. "Arthur, a video is going viral. We need to issue a statement." He felt a cold sweat prickle his skin. He opened his browser and typed his own name into the search bar. The results flooded his screen. CEO Arthur Finch in racist rant against soldier on flight. The Daily Beast. Finch Global Investments, CEO, verbally abuses black serviceman. Newsweek. Watch Captain shuts down. Entitled Businessman's Bigoted Tirade. Huffington Post. The video was everywhere. The clip shot from across the aisle was crystal clear. It captured his sneering face, his shouted words, "I refuse to sit next to this black soldier." It was damning. It was irrefutable. It had already been viewed over 1,000,000 times. The comments section was a torrent of pure vitriol, a digital mob calling for his head. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was bad. This was a catastrophe. But the meeting, the deal. If he could just close the deal, he could weather this storm. He could hire the best PR firms, make a few strategic donations to veterans' charities, and this would all blow over. The $7 billion prize was the only thing that could save him now. His driver finally broke through the traffic, screeching to a halt in front of the imposing Thorne Tower on Park Avenue. It was a monolith of black glass and steel, a monument to the power and influence of the man he was about to meet. Arthur straightened his already perfect tie, took a deep breath, and tried to compartmentalize the disaster unfolding online. He smoothed his suit jacket, pasting a confident, winning smile on his face. He was Arthur Finch. He closed deals. That's what he did. He was 10 minutes late. A cardinal sin in a meeting with a man like General Thorne. He was escorted by a silent, severe-looking assistant to the top floor. The executive suite was a masterpiece of understated power, mahogany walls, historical military art, and a panoramic view of Central Park. He was led to a large oak door. The assistant knocked once, then opened it. "Mr. Finch has arrived, General." Arthur walked in his rehearsed apology for his tardiness ready on his lips. General Wallace Thorne was standing by the window, his back to the door. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man, even in his late 60s. He wore a perfectly tailored grey suit that couldn't quite disguise the military bearing that was etched into his very soul. "Mr. Finch," the general said without turning around. His voice was a low baritone, rumbling, with a natural authority that made Captain Rostova's seem like a polite suggestion. "Thank you for coming. Please have a seat." Arthur sat in one of the leather chairs facing the general's massive desk. On the corner of the desk was a collection of framed photographs. The general finally turned around. His face was exactly as it was in the pictures, craggy, lined with piercing grey eyes that seemed to see right through you. He didn't smile. "Traffic was challenging," Arthur began, trying to sound composed. "Indeed," the general said, walking slowly toward his desk. "But sometimes the most challenging journeys are the ones that reveal the most about a man's character." The comment hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Arthur felt a fresh wave of panic. "Did he know? Has he seen the video, General?" Arthur said, deciding to press on. "I'm incredibly excited to walk you through the final details of our proposed merger. I believe the synergy between Finch Global and Thorne Industries will create an unparalleled force in the market." General Thorne sat down behind his desk. He didn't look at the meticulously prepared presentation Arthur had placed on the table. Instead, he picked up one of the framed photos. "My son flew home today," the general said, his voice quiet, conversational, yet infinitely more menacing than if he had been yelling. "He's been on a rough deployment. 6 months in a place I can't name, doing a job most people wouldn't have the stomach for. All he wanted was to get home. His mother, my wife, is in the hospital. A tough fight with cancer. He was flying home to be with her." Arthur's blood ran cold. The coincidence was too great, too cruel. It couldn't be. "I can only imagine how proud you must be of his service, General," Arthur said, his voice suddenly hoarse. "Proud doesn't begin to cover it." General Thorne said, his eyes fixed on the photograph. "He's a good man. Strong, principled, doesn't ask for much, just wants to be treated with the same basic respect he affords others." The general finally looked up from the photo, his grey eyes locking onto Arthur's. He held up the frame. "He sent me a text when he landed. Said he had a bit of trouble on the flight. Met a man who didn't care for his uniform, or the color of his skin." He slid the photograph across the polished mahogany desk. Arthur Finch stared down at the picture. It was a photo of General Thorne standing proudly next to a young man in an army dress uniform. The young man was smiling, his arm around his father. It was Sergeant Marcus Thorne. The photograph on the desk was not just an image. It was a verdict. The smiling face of Sergeant Marcus Thorne, standing beside his father, was the ghost that had followed Arthur Finch from the airplane cabin to this corporate cathedral. The world, which had always seemed so vast and subject to his command, had suddenly shrunk to the size of this desk, a space where his every sin was laid bare. Arthur felt the blood drain from his face. The air in the opulent office suddenly felt thin, unbreathable. His rehearsed speech about market synergy and shareholder value died in his throat, turning to dust. There were no words, no financial figures that could possibly bridge the chasm that had just opened beneath him. I didn't know. He stammered the words feeble and pathetic, even to his own ears. General Thorne's expression didn't change. It remained a mask of cold, controlled disappointment. Didn't know what, Mr. Finch, that he was my son. Would it have made a difference? Would you have been more comfortable sitting next to him if you knew his father was a man you wanted something from? Is a man's dignity dependent on his connections? Each question was a surgical strike cutting away at Arthur's defenses. He had no answers. The general wasn't looking for them. He was simply stating the facts of Arthur's character. Or is it, the general continued, leaning forward slightly, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl, that you didn't know a soldier in uniform, a black man, could be the son of a man like me, that you operate in a world where you place people in boxes based on your own pathetic prejudices? Arthur could only stare, his mouth agape. He was being dismantled not by a corporate rival, but by a father. My son called me when he landed. The general said, his voice regaining its calm, detached tone, which was somehow more terrifying. He didn't call to complain. Marcus isn't a complainer. He called to tell me he might be a little late getting to the hospital because he had to give a statement to airline security about a disruptive passenger. He was worried about his mother, not about the fool who insulted him. The general paused, letting the weight of his son's character settle in the room, a stark contrast to Arthur's. He didn't even tell me your name. He just described you. A man in an expensive suit who thought he owned the world. But then my head of communications called me in a panic about a viral video featuring our potential merger partner, and it all became very, very clear. General Thorne stood up and walked back to the window, looking out over the city. I built this company, Mr. Finch, on a foundation of 3 principles: integrity, discipline, and respect. Principles I learned at West Point, and principles I tried to instill in my son. We build equipment that protects men and women like him. We work with the United States government. Our name, our reputation, is our single most valuable asset. He turned back to face Arthur, his silhouette a dark, imposing figure against the bright sky. And you, with your vile, antiquated bigotry, have threatened to tarnish that name simply by your association with us. General, I can explain, Arthur pleaded, finding his voice at last. It was a desperate, panicked sound. It was a misunderstanding. The pressure of this meeting. I wasn't myself. On the contrary, the general cut him off sharply. I believe for the first time in your life, you showed someone exactly who you are, and I am grateful. You saved me from making the biggest mistake of my career. The finality in his tone was absolute. The $7 billion dream evaporated into smoke. The deal is off, Mr. Finch, the general stated flatly. There will be no merger between Thorne Industries and Finch Global. Not now, not ever. Arthur felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, as if the floor had dropped out from under him. General, please. We can't let a personal matter derail a deal of this magnitude. Think of the shareholders, the market. I am thinking of the market, the general retorted. I am thinking of what happens when my partners, my employees and my customers find out I was willing to do business with a man who treats a decorated American soldier like garbage because of the color of his skin. This isn't personal, Mr. Finch. It is the very definition of business. You are a liability. Your character is a risk my board will not accept." He walked to his desk and pressed a button on his intercom. "Susan, please show Mr. Finch out." The door opened immediately. The severe-looking assistant stood waiting. Arthur was frozen in his chair, his mind refusing to accept the reality of what was happening. His empire, his legacy was crumbling because of a 6-word sentence born of pure arrogance. "And Mr. Finch," the general added, as Arthur slowly, numbly rose to his feet, "Thorne Industries will be issuing a press release within the hour, formally terminating our merger negotiations and explaining in no uncertain terms precisely why. I suggest you call your publicist. It appears you're going to have another bad news day." The words were a death sentence. It wasn't just the deal he was losing. The general was going to publicly execute his reputation. As the assistant escorted a shell-shocked Arthur Finch out of the office, his eyes caught the photograph on the desk one last time. Sergeant Thorne was still smiling, a beacon of a world Arthur had failed to understand. The regret that had been a slow burn on the plane now erupted into a raging inferno, consuming everything: his pride, his ambition, his future. It was the regret of a man who had flown too close to the sun, not on wings of wax but on wings of hate, and was now plunging back to earth. The elevator ride down from General Thorne's office was a silent, terrifying descent into a new reality. The confident, powerful man who had entered the building an hour ago no longer existed. In his place was a hollowed-out shell, a ghost haunted by the consequences of his own arrogance. When Arthur Finch stepped out of Thorne Tower and back onto the bustling streets of Manhattan, the world looked different. The city's energy, which had once fueled his ambition, now felt oppressive and mocking. His phone, which he had silenced for the meeting, was vibrating with the intensity of a small engine. He looked at the screen. Over 100 missed calls, hundreds of text messages and emails. His digital life was a raging tire fire. He got into the back of his waiting car, the driver, Tony, wisely remaining silent. Arthur's hands trembled as he scrolled through the messages. His COO, Richard, was practically begging him to respond. His board members were demanding an emergency conference call. His wife had sent a dozen frantic texts. Then he saw the push notification from the Wall Street Journal. Thorne Industries terminates. 7,000. Merger talks with Finch global sighting. Profound differences in corporate and ethical values after CEO's viral incident. It was real. The general had done exactly what he said he would do. He had not just rejected Arthur. He had publicly branded him a pariah. In the hours that followed, the karma that Captain Rostova had set in motion came back on him with the force of a tsunami. First, the market reacted. The moment the Thorne Industries press release hit the wire, Finch Global's stock, which was publicly traded, went into freefall. Investors, spooked by the instability and the toxic reputation of its CEO, began dumping their shares. By the time the market closed, nearly 40% of the company's value, billions of dollars, had been wiped out. Arthur watched the stock ticker on his phone, the cascading red numbers, a testament to his ruin. Next came the corporate fallout. The emergency board meeting was a slaughter. His carefully chosen allies, men he had made rich, turned on him in an instant to save themselves and the company. They invoked a morality clause in his contract. Before his flight back to Atlanta, even landed, Arthur Finch was officially terminated as CEO of the company that bore his family name. He was voted out, stripped of his title and his power, a king deposed in a brutal, swift coup. The social consequences were just as devastating. Country clubs and charity boards, the very institutions that had once defined his social standing, rushed to distance themselves from him. His memberships were revoked. Invitations to galas and fundraisers were rescinded. His wife, a woman for whom social standing was everything, informed him via text that she was staying at their summer home in the Hamptons and had already contacted her lawyer. In the space of a single afternoon, he had become utterly toxic. But the hardest karma came from a place he never expected. A week later, after he had retreated to his now cavernous and empty mansion, a letter arrived. It was a simple envelope with no return address, postmarked from a town in upstate New York he'd never heard of. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was a hand-written note. Mr. Finch, my son Marcus told me what happened on the plane. He also told me what happened to you afterward. I take no joy in your suffering. I am writing this from my hospital bed. I am dying. The cancer has spread, and the doctors say I have only a few weeks left. The time I have with my son is the most precious thing I have. Your actions that day cost him several hours. Hours he could have spent with me. Hours we will never get back. Your money is gone, your job is gone. But those are things that can be earned again. I have lost time. That is a currency you can never refund. I do not write this out of anger, but out of a hope that you will understand the true cost of your prejudice. It is not measured in stock points or social standing, but in stolen moments between a mother and her son. I will pray for you. Eleanor Thorne. Arthur Finch read the letter once, then again. The paper trembled in his hands. Of all the blows he had suffered, the financial ruin, the professional disgrace, the social exile, this was the one that finally broke him. The hard, arrogant shell he had built around himself shattered, and for the first time in his life, he was confronted with the raw human consequence of his hatred. He had not just insulted a soldier, he had stolen irreplaceable moments from a dying mother. He saw Sergeant Thorne's weary face in his mind, and finally understood that the soldier's haste was not about disrespecting him, but about a desperate, loving race against time. He sat there in his silent, empty mansion, the letter on his lap, a ruined man. He had lost his fortune, his company, and his name. But it was only in that moment, reading the words of a woman he had never met, that he understood he had lost something far more valuable, his own humanity. The regret was no longer strategic. It was a profound, soul-crushing ache that he knew he would carry for the rest of his miserable life. This story serves as a powerful reminder that our true character is revealed not by our net worth, but in our treatment of others, especially those who serve. Arthur Finch learned this lesson in the most brutal way imaginable. He believed his money and status placed him above common decency. But Captain Rostova's unwavering authority was only the beginning of his downfall. The true lesson was delivered by General Thorne, a father who valued integrity and honor far more than any multi-billion-dollar deal. This wasn't a twist of fate. It was the direct, crushing weight of karma, a reckoning for one man's deep-seated prejudice. It's a testament to the fact that the uniform of a soldier commands respect, and the consequences for our actions, good or bad, will always find us. If this story of accountability and hard-earned lessons resonated with you, please show your support by hitting the like button and sharing it to spread this important message. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell for more compelling stories where character is truly everything.